Our first speaker today has just written a book about companies that are amazing at reinvention. Alex Osterwalder looks at the business models of companies that have managed to remain resilient in the toughest of times. Alex describes himself as a Swiss global citizen. He's the founder of Strategizer.com. He invented the business model canvas, which has been used by over 5 million people to map out and pivot their business ideas. His latest book is called The Invincible Company. And if you'd like to post about what he says or what any of our speakers are saying on social media, please do use the hashtag #WeWon'tStopTalking. Alex is going to talk about managing under uncertainty.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm going to see what I can sketch out in about 15 minutes. I'm going to put on my timer so I'm on Swiss time. I'm going to just quickly sketch out some of the ideas. Gee, I think I just lost the iPad. Okay, let's see, go back to it. So what I want to show you is when you go from idea to a real business, a beautiful building with some flags. Let's say this is a $500 million business. Well, normally people write business plans, but business plans, with this fantasy of how much money we're going to make, they're the worst tool. Actually, they're the enemy of innovation, because the innovation journey from idea to real business, in particular also in these times, is very messy. You think you got it right, then customers say your products are not worth anything, they're not interested to pay. If you get through this messy kind of process and get to building a real business, probably going to be pretty tired, right? That's the entrepreneurial journey. And a lot of ideas here, good ideas, rest in peace, they go under. This journey here is what we call the exploration of new ideas. Here we need to not find the best idea and implement it. We actually need to test, and adapt the idea until we find the right value proposition and business model. Once you start to become an established company here, well, then the journey changes. Then it's not about exploration anymore. Then it's about exploitation, managing what you have. And this is then a journey of scaling where here, failure is not an option anymore. So that is the journey from idea to business. Now, what does that mean when we have established companies and you get into a crisis like this, or just generally you want to innovate? Let's look at this journey. It's actually slightly different. We go from idea to business. And when you're an established company like Nestle, Unilever, so you start to have a portfolio of businesses. So I just want to quickly map this out. And your portfolio of businesses, you need to look at it on 2 axes. So this is our exploit portfolio of existing businesses. When you start out, and I'll draw a little business model canvas here for those who know it, you have a very weak business, is just starting out, right? So the death and disruption risk here is very high, in particular death risk, because it's a small, weak plant. But that will grow and make more and more money and become very established. And once you're established, the death risk goes down, okay? Return goes up, so up here is a great place to be. But what inevitably happens to businesses is that you get disrupted. So disruption risk here, think Kodak or think COVID-19. There's a huge risk of disruption. And now, it's kind of an atomic bomb scenario. All of us got disrupted. So now we're in a high-risk scenario and we need to reinvent ourselves. The question is, before we go down here and lose more and more money, can we return back to growth? That's what the journey of a business, okay? But that's the established stuff. Here, we know how to manage return, but we need to learn more about identifying disruption risk, because if, take Kodak, they went down here and died, rest in peace. If you take a company like Fujifilm, they were actually able to go up here and reinvent themselves to get back up here. Okay, so it's getting a little bit messy. That's why I'm going to just erase the stuff here that I drew. But the point is, you first have a portfolio of businesses that you need to manage in terms of death and disruption risk and in terms of return. But here's the thing. It's not enough to just reinvent what you have. You need to create an entire portfolio an entire portfolio of new businesses. So you need to create what we call an explore portfolio, which also has two axes. So now we're seeing our little tool here. On this axis, we have expected return, because if it's just an idea, we don't know if it's going to make money. It's just expected return, okay? And on this axis, we also have death risk, but that risk of mixing up a vision for a new idea and hallucination, like Steve Blank likes to call it. So when you start out with a new idea, you might think, oh, this is great, it's going to make a lot of money, we have a beautiful spreadsheet, but then you start testing it in the field and you realize, oh, can't make that much money, but you actually learned what is not going to work. So instead of building something, instead of implementing something with a business plan, you need to continuously test your idea until it's a sufficiently interesting business model from the expected return point of view, and you test it enough to decrease the innovation risk. So the big challenge in innovation, in exploration, is not to find the right idea. That's actually one of the myths in innovation. The big challenge in exploration is to adapt a good-looking idea or a bad-looking idea by experiments until you find a value proposition that customers care about and a business model that can scale profitably. Now let me give you an example. Actually, I'll first do a little quest and see if you can figure it out. So if we take our whole thing up here and say, to create a business up here, this is actually, if you were wondering what I was drawing before, this is a beautiful building with flags and a door, skyscraper. This is a $1 billion business. The question to you is, and I want you to put the answer in the chat window, how many projects worth $100,000, how many $100,000 projects do you need to invest in if you are Nestle, MasterCard, GE? How many projects do you need to invest in here and explore in order to create one big winner, one outlier? I want you to write down in the chat window, is it 10 projects that will be an investment of $1 million, meaning that maybe 8 or 9 will fail and only 1 will make it up here? So I don't know if, Eddie, you can see in the chat window, are people typing in some answers? How many projects? If you put 1,000 projects, you're basically saying you need to invest $100 million to create one outlier here. Any numbers? I can't see the chat window. Okay, so I'm guessing, you know, some of you write 2 projects, some of you write 10 projects, some of you write 100, maybe some of you write 1,000. Well, the ratio to create one outlier up here, one big winner, you know, this is like a big winner, you actually need to invest in 250 projects. Now, where do I get that data from? So you need to invest in 250 projects, and only one of those 250 will be a big outlier. So 1 out of 250 will make it up here. I get that data from early stage venture capital, meaning that 60% of all ideas, they're failures. They don't even return capital. Okay? And only 1 out of 250 or 4 out of 1,000, they actually return a decent amount of money, at 50 times capital. So what does that mean for us? When we have an established company, we can't pick the winner. We need to invest in a lot of losers or nearlings, they nearly made it, in order to let the winner emerge. So in terms of leadership, we can't pick the winner. We need to invest in a couple of projects for the winners to emerge. So as leaders, we need to create the conditions for winners to emerge, meaning conditions where teams can experiment, conditions where you actually kill the projects that don't lead to anything. So killing projects is the biggest skill and the most important skill of a world-class innovator. Now, what does that mean for COVID-19? It still means you can't pick the winner, but you might not expect, okay, I'm going to make a multi-billion-dollar win, but just very quickly to get up here, I still probably want to invest into maybe 10 projects in order for one to get up here. And if you're a smaller company, it's the same logic. But the logic is you can't pick the winner. Okay, now let me give you a real-world example. So that was the theory. I'll give you a real-world example with real numbers here of a company that started to work like that. And you might have heard of a company called Bosch, a German engineering company, industrial company with over 400,000 employees. Actually, interesting enough, a company called Bayer, which you might know from aspirin, right? They have a similar approach. So the question is, how many projects did they invest in over time? If we look at here their Explore portfolio, over 3 years, with their accelerator, the leader of the accelerator, Uwe Kirchner, built this up. They invest in 200 projects over 3 years. And they don't give these teams a big investment because you start out small. Because again, you can't pick the winner, but you don't give 200 projects $1 million because you would waste $200 million. So they gave them actually $120,000 or euros to explore, to test the idea for 3 months, okay? 3 months. And here's what's interesting. Only 60 projects get to the next round. What that means is they killed 70% of all projects after 3 months. So only 60 get follow-up investment. And then here, the follow-up investments, they get $300,000, okay? Get a little bit more time, like 6 months or so. And then again, they can explore. And those teams that bring evidence to the table, in this case it was 15, so again, they killed 75% of all projects. 15 were here, is what we call transferred to the execution engine, the exploitation engine. So they started with 200 over 3 years, so this was not a one-year process, and 15 were selected to go here. And not selected because they look best, but these were teams that brought most evidence to the table. They could prove that there is a real customer job to be done, customer pains, gains, that they could build a business model that would, return sufficiently large amounts of money or other types of returns like impact in order to be interesting enough for that company to invest in. So that's how you build an exploration portfolio as an organization where here you have many, many projects. And you have the ability to kill those projects based on evidence, not based on do you like the idea or not, do they bring evidence to the table. And you only invest, double down on those that bring evidence to the table in order to create the first winners here that will go up here and then probably, get disrupted and we have to reinvent them. So you need to actually work on those two portfolios, which we'll call exploit and explore at the same time. And that's what's really hard. And to make the link back to COVID-19, I believe that we call these invincible companies, that those companies who only focused on exploitation, and Rita McGrath talks about this a lot, really nicely, those companies are just not equipped for an uncertain world, and definitely not when they're disrupted. And we can see that with companies like Boeing or the airlines that were buying back shares. They never built the ability to explore. They never built an exploration portfolio. So I'll finish with two of the cases I really like from an innovation point of view. It's Amazon. Like, there's a lot of things we can criticize about Amazon, but they're world-class at innovation and execution. So they do both really well. But my favorite example at the moment is a company called Ping An, which turned from a boring financial conglomerate, we could say, into a technology company. So they were doing finance, banking, and insurance. But when they decided about 8 years ago to transform into a tech company, they invested in arenas, and now they manage the biggest health platform of the planet called Ping An Good Doctor, with 300 million users. So it's not Novartis or Pfizer, a pharmaceutical company managing that, or a health player. It's a financial institution because they built this ability to explore and exploit at the same time. And that is something that we're seeing right now, companies that built that exploration capability, the cultures, the metrics, because we know how to do this now. They gave innovation power. Those companies are well positioned to master COVID-19 and come out of it a lot stronger. And I'll stop there. So I had maybe 14 minutes talking a little bit about the basic concepts. But what I want you to take away here is that you need to be able to manage two cultures under one roof. And today, even if you have to go fast and reinvent yourself, you still need to test your ideas just 10 times faster than usual, because you can't pick the winner. And if you think you can pick the winner, you're delusional. As a leader, you need to create the conditions in terms of metrics, in terms of rewards, in terms of culture, in terms of power structures for the winners to emerge. That's what leadership is about today, not to tell people what to do, but to create the conditions for the winners to emerge. So stop there, and I think we have a little bit of time for questions.
Thanks, Alex. So we've had a couple of really interesting questions coming across the chat. I'll just read a few of them out to you. So Patricio Hidalgo is asking, what's the ratio of C-suite that you know about who's embracing this 1 out of 250 successfully?
Yeah. So there's no, I would say, there are companies like Bosch and Bayer that are doing this, Amazon, Ping An, but there's no scientific research today that shows you how many companies are actually doing this, statistically. But there's something you can do, and I call it the Rita McGrath test, and I think she's going to speak as well, right? So I call it the Rita McGrath test, and it's very simple. If you want to know if your company is able to innovate or not, you need to look at your CEO's agenda and see if at least 40% of his or her time is blocked out every week, 40% or more of his or her time to work on innovation. If not, innovation is not going to happen. You probably want to change the company because it's one of the companies that's going to get disrupted. You can do the same looking at the last 5 leadership meetings. If there's not 40% of the agenda allocated to strategic innovation, I'm not talking R&D, I'm talking business R&D. If that's not the case, companies can't innovate. So it's still a very small number, but the shift is now happening. I'd say the last 5 years, things changed dramatically.
What about smaller companies? Because you've spoken about multinationals and about companies that have scale. What about smaller companies, especially in this environment right now?
It's the same thing, right? It's just a different ratio, because when you're a smaller company, you're not expecting $1 billion return. So it might be, you start with 3 projects in order for one to emerge, okay? And maybe it's just 20% of, different people's time. So you just need to scale back the kind of resources, but it's the same logic, or then it's 10 to 1. And the reality is, and this is really for companies of any size, maybe except for the startup that's just trying to find their first idea, you focus on one, but it's the same logic. It's just a different kind of dimension, and the rest applies the same way. And if you take companies, often they do this in business units with different numbers than 250. And not everybody starts like Amazon. They built this over years, where they have thousands of experiments running at the same time. But again, this is not inaccessible to small companies, 30 people, 60 million in revenues. It's exactly the same logic. It's a dual portfolio, and it's all about the structure.
What about a question from Chris Payton, Quirk Solutions? He says, the concept or theory is sound, but the reality may be very different. How many companies right now have $420,000 to invest on getting 15 sound projects?
Oh, that's a large number. I mean, all of the companies we work with today, and I don't work with smaller companies. We work with pharmaceutical companies, with banks. It's peanuts, the numbers, because if you just look at how much money is invested in R&D, the classic R&D, which is that today you can't get any competitive advantage from technology and product innovation. You get copied immediately. So you need to invest in business R&D. Those sums are in the hundreds of millions to billions. Taking just 10% of that, I believe, would allow most companies to probably double their revenues and profits. And you can see that at Ping An, right? Within 7 years, they went from the top 300 companies to the top 30 because they made this shift. So it's definitely peanuts today. You just need to get, 10 million, 50 million, which is nothing on the scale of more established companies. If you're a company that has revenues of 60 million, it's maybe 2 million. That is the reality of what's happening today. Companies that don't do this, I would say, rest in peace, because the disruption is inevitably going to happen. Obviously now is a terrible scenario. It's a 1 in 100 year scenario, so we can't take this as the reference point. But many companies are going to die even in normal times if they don't build this dual portfolio. Doesn't matter if you're making 60 million or 600 million or 6 billion, same logic.
So a lot of questions now flowing through, and we do promise if we can't answer them now, we will give you a chance to ask these later. Question from Shams Hassan at Dell. What about getting effective at abandoning successful products before they run out of steam?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. So what you need to be able to do here, up on the right-hand corner, is know when the life cycle is coming to an end. And again, I like quoting Rita McGrath's work. Well, she shows, the transient advantage of companies that are really good in killing, and ideas and reallocating resources. Logitech is a beautiful example where they reallocated, 75% of the resources from up here to down here more and more. While, and in that case, it was already kind of a bit over the edge, but you need to reallocate the resources early enough. That's extremely hard to do, but with good management, focusing on innovation, that actually happens.
So one more question. I wondered about, so here's a question from Silke Zellenker. You have to excuse my accents. What's the first step you'd recommend a leader of a small company does to build exploration capacities in this time of COVID-19?
Yeah. So, let me first say in a general way, give innovation power, because we know how this stuff works. It's just that innovation never has power. So it should be a co-CEO or somebody who has really respect in the company. Don't put some young person coming out of university on this. Another innovation myth. Oh, we need young, fresh thinking. That's the worst, because nobody's going to respect them. So put your smartest people on exploration projects, give innovation power. In particular now, it's kind of short, to build these skills, because you don't learn this overnight. It's a profession. It's different from the management profession. But I would say step number one is show that you're serious about it, give it power, and as a leader, invest at least 40% of your time in innovation.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear stories of companies that have been able to thrive. Of course, we know that even those who are doing well, like food delivery companies, have had their challenges. I'm based in the UK, and Ocado, who delivers food to my home, has seen its servers so overloaded that at one point they thought they were having a denial of service attack. After Boris Johnson announced a national lockdown, Ocado filled 3 weeks of delivery slots in an hour. Now their service is far from perfect. That unprecedented demand means they canceled my slots with no notice, but I'm willing to trade that for the convenience of getting not only the food I need, but that for 2 neighbors who are at risk, as well as 2 family members who are at risk. When this whole thing is over, there will be a litany of how we did it stories.